I'd like to bring on Andrew Jones to present his work and develop the panel further.
Okay, so as the title of the paper suggests, the paper examines how the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats use the legislative process in the House of Lords to manage their period of coalition between 2010 and 2015. And the presentation falls into 4 sections. So first, I'll discuss the paper's contribution to the coalition and House of Lords literature, and this will include some details of a theory to be tested. Second is the research design. Then I'll outline the findings of the paper before finishing with a discussion of why does this matter to the study of coalitions in the House of Lords. So the main finding in the paper is that the government backbenchers in the Lords did use amendments and parliamentary questions to help manage the coalition's policy making. And this makes contributions to 2 areas. The first is to the keeping tabs literature, and I'll discuss that a little bit more on the next slide. And really this contribution is twofold. So until now, elections are seen as the sole driver of this sort of behaviour, and upper chambers have largely been ignored in that they play no part in the everyday management of coalitions. So now the discovery of policing behaviour in this unelected upper chamber in the UK kind of raises significant questions of these assumptions. And the second area of literature is the contribution to building on our existing knowledge of the constraints placed on members in the House of Lords. And we know from existing research from Emma Crew and Meg Russell that there's these quite strong sociological and psychological constraints on members of the Lords, but we know much less about how these members pursue their individual preferences within the constraints.
Andrew, I think
yes.
Your screen might have frozen there. We're still on the first slide.
Right, okay, sorry. Can you see that now? I'll stop sharing.
No,
but I'll share again, sorry.
Yes, okay, yeah, so we see the different slides.
Okay, is that what I've just, so that should be what I've just been spoken about, so you can take my word for it. Is that the top of the theory of policing, Martin and Van Berg?
Theory of policing, yeah. Sorry, I asked her there, I apologise.
Okay, no, it's not a problem. So the paper tests Martin and Van Berg's 2011 theory, and as I've already said, this lies within the keeping tabs literature. And really this literature recognised that parties are required to delegate policy making to individual ministers within coalitions, but these ministers are also members of their own party, and so kind of have incentives to shift policy away from the collective coalition positions and closer to their own party's preferred positions. And parties understand this, so there's lots of kind of mechanisms that parties have used to ease these tensions, and really Martin and Van Berg's theory of policing identifies the legislative process as being the sole kind of use for this purpose. And the theory predicts that as policy disagreement grows within the coalition, but legislation in those areas should undergo greater scrutiny as parties look to lessen this threat from ministers kind of cheating on the coalition deal. And to test this question in the House of Lords, I examined legislative amendments and written parliamentary questions during the 2010 to 2015 coalition. And in short, these 2 hypotheses state that as disagreement between the Conservatives and Lib Dems in a policy area increase, and so will the number of amendments and written questions directed at bills and departments by government backbenchers. In terms of research design, I gathered data on over 7,000 amendments and over 9,000 parliamentary questions during the period being examined. And the dependent variable consists of a count of a number of amendments or parliamentary questions directed at either a bill or a government department. And this was achieved by constructing 2 Dyadic datasets, as forwarded by kind of Prosh and Slappin in 2011. And for the amendment analysis, this contained combinations of each government backbencher with each of the 90 government bills in the study. And for the parliamentary question analysis, it was each member combined with each of the government departments. And we can see a little bit of a snippet. I won't put it up for long because it's blurry and it will give you all a headache. This is an example, as I said, of the amendments, and we can see that Baroness Southwark at the top is paired with the Education Act in 2011. And on that act, during its passage, she supported 11 amendments. And the main independent variable is the measure of policy disagreement between the coalition partners for a given policy area. So the policy positions for the 2 parties were calculated using manifesto data from the MARPOR project, and then a policy difference score was calculated simply from a difference between the position scores of the 2 parties in a given policy area. And then this score was assigned to the bills and departments that were assigned to those policy areas. And we can see at the bottom of the screen that there's some summary statistics for the policy difference scores. And really the important thing to note here is that the scores range from 0, where the coalition partners were in agreement in a policy area, up to the upper limit of 3.89. Oops. And to help control for some of the individual level factors in the Lords, I've constructed a data set on 291 Conservative and Liberal Democrat backbenchers, and data was collected on a member's sex, their length of service, and attendance to the chamber. I also coded a previous career for each member using an approach that Russell and Benton used when producing a report for the Appointments Committee in 2009. And this allowed for a number of binary variables to be constructed that indicated a member's sex, whether they served a full term or entered the House after 2010, whether they had previous experience of representative politics, and also whether a government backbencher had professional experience in the policy area being targeted. And also controlled for some minor bill and departmental level variables. So moving on to the findings, and starting with the analysis of the amendments, we can see on the horizontal x-axis that we have a policy difference score of a bill, and then the vertical axis is the predicted number of amendments tabled to a bill from a government backbencher. And you'll notice immediately that there's 2 lines, and this reflects a large effect of a member having professional experience in the policy area being targeted. So a backbencher with professional experience in the same area as a bill, so the curve with the triangles on, are, all things being equal, predicted to table 9 times more amendments than those without professional experience. You'll also note that the upward slope of the 2 curves, and this indicates that the numbers of amendments from government backbenchers increased as policy disagreement within the coalition grew. So when the coalition partners agreed on an issue, so down on the left, bottom left of the x-axis, backbenchers, regardless of their professional experience in a policy area, are predicted to table fewer than 5 amendments on a bill. But as policy difference increases across to the right on the x-axis, you see the lines begin to move apart. And at the upper limit of policy disagreement, a backbencher with no previous professional experience in a policy area is predicted to table around 10 amendments, and this increases quite significantly to 60 amendments for a backbencher with previous experience in a policy area. So, good news, well, certainly for my research, these findings support the earlier hypothesis and provide evidence that amendments were used to police policy making in the coalition. And also the control variables offer something of interest, and in this case, male government backbenchers tabled 35% fewer amendments than their female colleagues, but there was no effect associated with being a new member or having held previous political office. And now moving on to the parliamentary questions analysis. Once again, we can see that there's a difference between backbenchers with professional experience in a policy area and those without. So with parliamentary questions, backbenchers with previous experience in a policy area were predicted to ask 4 times more questions. And like with the amendment analysis, we see this upward slope, and this shows that the numbers of parliamentary questions asked by government backbenchers increased as disagreements between the partners over a policy area grew. So the number of questions asked by a backbencher with no previous experience ranges from 2, where the partners are in complete agreement, up to 6 at the upper limit of disagreement. And this increases to 6 and 21 for a member with professional experience. And these findings are what you'd expect if parliamentary questions were being used to police government departments. And it again means we can, it means we can accept the hypothesis outlined earlier. And once again, the control variables offer something equally as interesting, certainly for me, as the main kind of analysis. And first, female backbenchers asked 40% fewer parliamentary questions than males. And this is almost a mirror image of what we saw with amendments. But on top of that, new members asked 50% fewer questions than members who'd been in position prior to 2010. And former politicians asked significantly more parliamentary questions than those without previous experience of politics. So what conclusions can we draw? And the first is that there is evidence of amendments and parliamentary questions being used to police for the 2010 to 2015 coalition. And this supports Martin and Van Berg's theory, but it also has implications for the keeping tabs literature more generally. And first is the behaviour in the absence of elections, and this suggests that the range of institutional settings in which we might expect to see policing occur could be broader than we previously thought. And also evidence of policing in the upper chamber of a system that is unaccustomed to, or completely unaccustomed to, coalition in the modern era makes a strong case for the inclusion of upper chambers in other areas of this literature. In relation to the House of Lords, the finding of this strong relationship between the behaviour of members and their previous professional experience starts to raise questions around the model of representation the post-1999 House of Lords best fit. However, there's limits to these findings that arise out of not being able to control for the behaviour of a large chunk of the opposition in the shape of the crossbenchers. And finally, on the final slide is some interesting points to perhaps take forward from here. There's clearly a sex-based difference between the use of amendments and parliamentary questions. Now, assuming that we might find this elsewhere in Parliament, and that I've found no kind of valid reason why this should be the case, and certainly if someone's got some suggestion, I'd be happy to hear them. This was something that perhaps needs to be investigated some more. And to finish, the difference between the use of amendments and parliamentary questions might interest practitioners in Parliament. There certainly appears to be a barrier that prevents newer members from using parliamentary questions to the same extent that they use amendments. And this idea is supported with evidence that previous politicians use the parliamentary question process much more. And this might be something that needs addressing if we want the kind of questioning mechanisms to fulfil their full purpose. Thank you.